Hello lovely people, Thyworm here with a build guide for last Epoch patch 0.9. This is my Blaster 2.0, the new iteration of an old build that I made. These days, with the new overhaul in 0.9, Lightning Blast is a fun skill to use, but it doesn't do insane damage or anything. Don't expect this to be a miracle, but it's enjoyable, which is important. Let's dive in. All sorts of useful links are in the description. This is a lightning blasting mage made primarily for mapping in the Monolith. It has 100% crit, some autocasted support abilities, it's fairly tanky, and I completed around 150 plus corruption with ease so far, plus some dungeons. And that is on still rather average gear. This is my honest build guide, it is just something fun to play, so let's look at the pros and cons. Here are the pros. It is a smooth mapper. Lightning Blast is one of my favorite skills, so that's a pro, and it has a very simple, straightforward playstyle, making this a good build for beginners. Then the cons, it is not the fastest build out there. I leveled using Lightning Blast, which does take some levels to get going, and bosses can take quite some time to kill, especially tanky ones like Lagon or the Emperor of Corpses. Let's start with the build requirements. In terms of uniques, there are no must-have items here. However, there are a few very good uniques which work wonderfully for this build, but I'll go into those when we talk about the gear. That means it's easy to get this build going, all things considered, so there are no real build requirements. Then the build philosophy. My build philosophy in general is just that I want to play fun builds. I don't have endgame requirements or aspirations per se, and I see no reason honestly to farm 400 corruption. It's the exact same gameplay as 100 corruption after all, with just a little bit better loot. This build to me is, like I said, just fun, just electrifying everyone. What more do you really want? So, if you like what you see, give it a go. The idea of this build specifically is mainly that I want a smooth mapping build, and with Lightning Blast that chains across the screen, clearing maps is easy. It is not super fast, you don't rush towards the objectives, but rather get the bonus timeline stability by killing monsters on your way to the objective. So, what do you need in terms of stats? Here is the wish list. In terms of defenses, make sure to get res capped of course and get 100% crit avoidance. I use the Woven Flesh for easy crit avoidance. The blessings in the Monolith can help a lot here too, as well as idols. Furthermore, you want health as soon as you make the swap to ward. After you found the relic we will be talking about, you want some water retention. Mana regen is useful too for auto-casting. In terms of offense, we are scaling added crit spell damage and crit multiplier as our main sources of damage. The goal is to get 100% crit chance for Lightning Blast. An offhand catalyst with flat spell crit chance like the Crystal Skull can help out a lot here. Shock chance is mandatory and armor shred helps too. Added spell damage is quite good, and if possible get lightning penetration on an amulet. Lastly, you get any lightning damage, elemental damage or spell damage. That all works. Let's look at skill specialization and the skills that we're using. I will not discuss specifically each point invested, but instead focus on the most important nodes. You can see everything in the build planner for yourself. Let's start with Lightning Blast. You first path towards Arcane Power for the chains, then Storm Razor for more damage and base crit, then take 4 out of 4 overcharge and then hypercharge for a chance to cast Lightning Blast 4 times. After this you fill up the rest. For extra chain range, I really like Surging Influence. Closed Circuit is good for single target because Lightning Blast now chains between you and the target if you're close enough. Shatter Shock is a more multiplier if an enemy is shocked or chilled, which they will be. Lightning Attunement provides Lightning Aegis, which is an extremely useful buff, providing 50% increased lightning damage plus 25% less damage taken. Any remaining points you may have from gear you put into front loaded for more damage. Up next, Flame Ward, the tried and tested defensive skill for mages. I autocast this ability, by the way. I first focus on damage to help us get through the campaign, so take Dilation, Infusion and finally Lightning Ward to convert all of the fire stats to lightning ones. Through Flames adds flat spell damage, which is great, but only pick this if you have enough points. And then we handle the defenses, so that's 5 out of 5 barrier for 40% less damage taken, plus 3 out of 3 prismatic buffer for 30% reduced elemental damage taken. Then our movement ability, Teleport. You can spec teleport in many ways, there's no real right or wrong here I feel. I went for some more damage with Elemental Affinity, some ward generation with Ether Barrier, Stable Bubble and Out of Mind. And then finally cooldown recovery so I can cast Teleport more often with 4 out of 4 Comet Rush. Up next is Static, another autocast ability. This ability gains charges when we move or crit, and then automatically using autocast it discharges, providing buffs and dealing very good damage. This kills a bunch of stuff while running around in the Monolith. First, let's get the charges up with High Voltage and Storm Chaser. Then we take Reverberation and 4 out of 4 Insulation, because we don't have the mana to cast Static that often, plus the ward you get here is quite nice. Then, depending on the number of points you have, fill up Empower, travel to 3 out of 3 Electrify for more crit, and finally Surge for even more charge generation. Finally, Arcane Ascendance. We're not focused on single target with the build, but this clears map bosses quite nicely. It is a buff that locks you in place, makes you cast really fast and does tons of damage. Teleport still works here, by the way. First, make your way over to Acuity, so this skill doesn't drain mana anymore, that is the most important thing. I take 1 out of 3 Cunning, allowing you to cast 8 spells before the buff ends. That is typically enough, because you can't be standing still for much longer anyway during bosses, or you die. The rest of the tree is just pure damage, with Higher Plane, 5 out of 5 Power Overload, Unstable Energy for cast speed, Superconductor to cast additional lightning blasts, and Closed Circuits to reduce the Superconductor cooldown. Time to look at the passives. I have recorded, link below, the progression of the passives, so you can see that for yourself in the planner. I will just pick out a few notes that I want to highlight. Intelligence is a great stat for this build, scaling damage and providing ward retention, so we take all of it. Cast speed is good too, so you have Mage Flurry in the Mage tree, and anything that has to do with crit, so Knowledge of Destruction, you take that too. The ward nodes you see in here you get much later on, after you found the unique relic. In the Sorcerer tree, we take Arcane Momentum and Essence of Celerity for cast and movement speed. These nodes also incentivize you to kill stuff rather than rush to the objectives. The whole bottom side of this tree is dedicated to lightning damage, so clearly we take all of it. There is some flat spell damage over here with Spellslinger and Archmage. Try not to go over 200 max mana so you get that triple bonus. And finally 4 out of 4 Recollection for increased cooldown recovery speed. Then, also very important, gear. Let's talk about a specific relic, the Twisted Heart of Ukairos. This you can farm from the Emperor of Corpses in the Reign of Dragons timeline. It is amazing for this build and provides a ton of health and ward generation, plus a +1 to elemental spells. It converts health to ward whenever we cast a spell, which we do all the time. This means we need a source of health leech to replenish our health. I am using a Woven Flesh, because that's just an easy unique to get and it gives 100% crit avoidance. There is another mage item that's very useful for this, called the Prism Weave, which provides the same use. That chest is arguably better because it makes you very defensive against elemental damage too, but the choice is yours. You will have to worry about crit avoidance if you take the Prism Weave. In case you haven't got the relic just yet, there's no worries at all, just use a good mage relic instead. You will have much less ward, but you will still have good health sustain because of all the leech. Another luxury item that recently got overhauled is the Ocearion, a ring that randomly drops, but it's very rare. It provides chill, shock, shock duration, and most importantly, 1% more damage per stack of shock. Shock can have 10 stacks, so this ring is 10% more damage. That's pretty huge, and I think they stack, but I only have one of them so far. The rest of the gear is primarily focused on crit chance and crit multi. If you can get enough of that in your gear, you can use a staff like I do. Otherwise, use a wand plus a skull catalyst, because getting crit capped is more important than flat spell damage. The rest of the gear is decent, but really nothing special, with health, some more damage, shock chance on the weapon, which is very important, and that's really about it. For idols, I am just using these to get crit chance and fix my resistances. Just fill out the idols to your own needs. I'll stall out this section a little bit to hover over the idols so you can actually see what I have here, but you know, it is, like I said, nothing special. For blessings, same idea. I'm taking all the resistance blessings typically because I don't want to deal with resistances. It is, once again, nothing special. You will get these by naturally progressing through the monolith, and as you get more, you can replace gear as you go. I created a loot filter specifically for this build. Please use this at your own risk, however, because it is tailored to my needs and might contain some mistakes. For example, I put in level restrictions so that at some point, at certain character levels, the rule doesn't apply anymore. I did use this thing myself from the start and I leveled all the way to level 95 using this filter, so it's pretty good, but I'm sure it's not 100% perfect. If you're interested, let me walk you through it. I recolored idols for you with affixes you want. I made flashy green all the affixes that give you levels for the skills you're using. I made grey all the items outside your build with at least tier 4 class specific affixes, so you can disenchant those. The loot filter shows normal items until level 10. It shows the best usable staffs in orange, and movement speed boots are green up to a certain level. And then there are more colors for all of your other loot, starting at the bottom with yellow and gradually getting stricter all the way to purple. At some point I put a level cap on most of those rules, so yellow items will show up until a certain character level and then not anymore. Should be smooth sailing. You can also enable more rules hiding certain low-level base items, making the filter even stricter. Here's the build in action. You will notice this build doesn't do insane damage. My staff is not the best, first of all, but more importantly, I really value just a fun, achievable build rather than a min-max one no one can realistically get, in online mode at least. You're simply making your way through the map, autocasting Flame Ward and Static, and just blasting those chain lightning spells. I think it's very satisfying, and with the new visuals and sounds, a ton of fun to play. You right click for Arcane Ascendance if you encounter a tough mob, and because we're pretty tanky with all the leech and the ward, you can take a few hits typically. You just teleport between the packs. It's very straightforward, it's very simple, I think it's very enjoyable, at least in my opinion. When it comes to timeline bosses, this build is definitely struggling because of the lack of single target. You can easily turn Lightning Blast into a good single target skill, but then it doesn't chain anymore and that's half the fun. It does kind of matter which boss we're talking about here. Your typical Oribus is normally fine, it doesn't take too long to kill him. But if you go up to the Emperor of Corpses or Lagon, which is bugged half of the time as well with Lightning Blast, yeah, then it gets really annoying and it's pretty bad. Talking about leveling for a bit, it is pretty slow, but that is because of recent nerfs to leveling. I did level with Lightning Blast, which is nice on the one hand because it is your starting skill, but it's not that nice on the other hand because at low levels it's not very good. There are better skills to level, like Glacier. It takes until you ascend into a Sorcerer before this skill really pops off a little bit, but at least once it does, it's typically fine. You might hit similar roadblocks in the Monolith at times, especially when you're still level 70 and you're doing level 90 timelines. Just remember that equipping a good staff or wand with good flat spell damage helps an awful lot and is typically a huge damage boost. And don't forget about Shock either, it reduces the lightning resistance and it is really a multiplier to your damage. So if you don't have a source of shock damage, just get it and craft it on a wand or a staff. Let's talk some Monolith Modifiers. I would avoid crit avoidance if you can, as this is a 100% crit build. Without crit, your damage is really bad. I would also try to avoid giving the enemies tons of damage, especially physical or void damage. And of course, stuff like deadly when not hit, frenzy, haste, all those nasty modifiers. Healing if not damage recently can also really screw up timeline boss fights, so be careful with that. But honestly, that's not build specific, only the crit avoidance is. I spent a good chunk of time on these guides, which is why I don't release too many of them. If you appreciate the effort, consider liking or subscribing, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching, see you soon, love you all, bye bye.